This is my first time giving a talk at Green Gulch. Yeah, so it's always fun to come to a new place, and the forms are a little different. At Tassajara in City Center, we only chant the opening chant once instead of 3 times. So perfect opportunity to not get stuck in habits, right? And I want to thank the Tanto, Timo-san, for the invitation, and my old friend Cam, Reverend Zenju Osho. Good to see you, Josen, Kika, some people that I have known for a while here. And welcome to everyone who I don't know, and perhaps we'll get to know each other a little better for the favorite part of the whole thing, right? The tea and cookies. Yeah. And hello to those of you online. There's a camera right in front of me, so. Yeah, so I just returned about 2 months ago. I left Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, where I had been living this time around for 27 months. So I have come and gone quite a bit at Tassajara since I first quit my job in 2008 and went to Tassajara. So I was just there for these 27 months, and I left on December 18th, so it's almost been exactly 2 months. And of course, people have been asking me, do you miss it? And I would say yes and no, right? There's many ways that it's difficult or challenging to live in that kind of environment. And for those of you who've never been to Tassajara, it's a beautiful mountain valley, just about an hour outside of Carmel, 45 minutes outside of Carmel Valley Village, over this steep, windy, unpaved, mountainous road that occasionally washes out and gets too muddy to drive over or too icy. But I think what I miss most is, of course, the quiet. And at Tassajara, there's this wonderful creek that goes by. It's almost always running. Okay, I think I've only seen a few summers where it's gotten down to pools in different areas rather than a flowing creek. But that Tassajara Creek is this one continuous sound that is quite beautiful and relaxing, and it's easy to fall asleep to it. And now that I'm at City Center, that river is a river of noise, right? Dogs barking, people yelling, sirens, wayward car alarms. So it's been, taking a little bit to get used to living in the city. And what I find really transformative about Tassajara, practicing at Tassajara for as long as I have, is there's so many opportunities, a lot of them unexpected, to study the self, right? So we're here staring at the wall, practicing seated meditation to become more intimate with what's going on with ourselves, right? Our psycho-emotional, physical landscape, if you will, right? We're taking that backward step, as some of you might have heard that phrase that Eihei Dogen uses, to look at ourselves, to investigate thoroughly, which is also a phrase that he really likes to use as well. So we're studying this person that I call Heather, right? That's my responsibility. And at Tassajara, like I said, there's a lot of opportunities to study this one. Not only when I'm sitting on the cushion for all the meditation that we do there, but also just being immersed in this natural environment. And I think that transformative aspect of being in nature for so long, and before these last 2 years or so, I've lived there before for about 7 years, is that you start to feel a little more elemental, not so solid, or not so separate from the creek and the trees and the birds and the flowers and the people that you meet on the path, whether they're there for guest season or they're your Dharma friends, occasionally your Dharma frenemies, but you are immersed in this natural setting. And I have yet, maybe you all can come up with a new word with me, but that word environment, is like your surroundings. And I don't know, when I feel like I'm surrounded, that's like a defensive posture, right? So I don't like that word because it means surroundings, environs. So I want a word that is more, that I feel integrated in nature rather than surrounded by it. I'm a part of nature. And I think that that's what happens in our very modern, very busy society is we don't have an opportunity to feel elemental. And maybe some of you who live out sort of in the wilderness, and I'm from the Bronx, so this is wilderness, that we don't get to feel those elements, right? The air, water, the heat of our bodies, how we're just these bodies. And it's interesting, when I'm at Tassajara, I have a much higher tolerance for cold. And I remember one time when I left, I went to New York to help out at the Brooklyn Zen Center. It was this massive snowstorm that they haven't had in a long time. And I was all bundled up with my boots and my down jacket. But at Tassajara, when it's like 25 degrees, I'm walking around in my robes. And I don't know where that superpower comes from, but there's some way that my body is regulating itself. And not that obviously I know being out in those kinds of conditions are, out on a mountaintop would be life-threatening. But just walking through the valley, feeling like I'm part of, because we are, not separate from what's going on. And somehow our body regulates itself. And you're also, when you stay for a year or two, you're in rhythm with the seasons, right? You feel the seasons inside of you, right? You feel these seasons. We all have our own internal seasons. Like for me, the summer, I get really irascible when it's hot, just saying. And for those of you who survived my irascibility at Tassajara, maybe Cam a little bit, and Kika was there as well, I don't like hot weather. So there's a part of me that comes out in really hot weather that maybe isn't always so friendly. It just wants to get cold and stay in the creek and feel comfortable, right? We like comfort. So these opportunities to study, opportunity to study myself is everywhere at Tassajara. Not only obviously in the interactions with my fellow community members, but also with the natural environment. And one of those occasions was when I went and hiked the Tony Trail, which if you've been to Tassajara, it's one of the steepest trails. And on my way down, I was feeling really kind of proud, because I'm a little bit of a, as my spouse likes to say, she calls me a seal. I just kind of like to lie around. So I was feeling really proud that I had gone up the Tony Trail and down, and I was making my way through this knee-high grass, right? Kind of reed-like grass. And then all at once, or I don't know, in such rapid succession it felt all at once, there was what? The rattle-hiss-coil of death. So I say but it didn't feel like I just, rattle-hiss-coil, I didn't really see the rattlesnake, and I just heard it first, and then this body just jumped as far away as possible, right? And then I could see it over there, coiled. It was very thick and dark brown, and I was like, whoa, and it was still hissing at me. So immediately what happens, right, is I did this, like, there was this, I guess I would say, an automatic body scan. All of a sudden, I felt my thumping of my heart was still going, all this adrenaline rush, and if you've ever been in a situation like that, your senses really come online, and you're just searching your surroundings. And I'm in the high grass. I'm still looking for another rattlesnake. And so I was going back to the creek. There's parts of the creek that have maybe less of this tall grass for a rattlesnake to hide in. But there's also a lot of poison oak, which I have never gotten living there, and I didn't want to get. But for me, I just went through what may have been poison oak because I knew that rattlesnakes don't go in the water. And I was trying to perhaps escape the rattlesnake or the rattlesnake's friend, or if there was another rattlesnake. So I just went into the creek through maybe what was poison oak and just went across and then went back to the main grounds of Tassajara. It was a day off, so I just got my picnic lunch and I went to the lower garden, and everything just seemed so vibrant, right? Because there was just this experience of, whoa. So I sat there in the lower garden, and I just marveled at how incredibly beautiful the Mexican sage is. It's just, I love purple. One day this will be purple. I just love purple, and so there was this gorgeous Mexican sage there, and I just ate my lunch, and I just was really grateful for being. I mean, I know it's rare that somebody gets bitten by a rattlesnake. I think it's only happened once in like 50 years in the vicinity of Tassajara. So it's not something that happens a lot. So later that evening, of course, it's a great war story. There's lots of war stories at Tassajara. But later in that evening, I was reflecting on this event where I jumped completely out of the way to get away from this rattlesnake. And it reminded me of some of those stories that I would hear, these awakening stories that I heard when I first started practicing Zen in Austin, Texas, back in 2001 or so, right, where the teacher hits somebody with a kotsu or a whisk, or they hear a sound, and all of a sudden they're awakening, they had great Kensho, and they're a completely different person. So one of those first stories that I heard was about this teacher, Kyokan Chikan, and he lived in the 900s, the Tang Dynasty in China, and he taught on Fragrant Mountain, and they say he had over 1,000 monastic disciples. But although he was a very skilled scholar, right, he had all these volumes of the sutras that he would study, he had not yet realized enlightenment. And one day his teacher offers him this koan, right? Koan is one of those paradoxical anecdotes that confound our logical mind. What was your original face before you were born? I've also heard it, what was your original face before your parents were born? So, of course, being the scholar that he is, he rushes to his books to see where the answer is, right? He's looking for the answer, not trusting this, looking for knowledge in his intellect. Because he's not able to find the answer, he burns all of his books, and he leaves his teacher and he decides to go traveling. And he builds, of course, a grass hut. And he plants bamboo to keep him company. And one day, right, he's sweeping, right, one of those daily activities that we do quite a bit at all three temples of San Francisco Zen Center. And a piece of tile, I'm not sure where the tile came from in the middle of where he was, but maybe it was a pebble tile. It hit the bamboo stalk. And he had this experience. He had this Kensho, this dropping of body and mind, this great awakening, they call it. And he composed this verse of understanding, right? So if you've ever read koans or studied koans with a teacher, the student, after realizing, or the master, would write a verse of their understanding of that koan. So here's his understanding of the koan about what was your original face before your parents were born. So Chikan writes this: "One hit and I lost what I know. I won't be training myself again. Action and repose given over to the old path. I won't be sinking into worry. No traces wherever I go. Deportment beyond sound and sight. Masters of the way in all directions. Masters of the way in all directions will call this the highest faculty." Right, so after this unexpected event, he no longer needed to train himself by cultivating his intellect, right? And he had already burned all of his books. Because he knew the thick weeds of these concepts obscured his original face, right? They covered the old path, right? The old path of the original face. Buddha nature is another way that we often refer to this mystery of life. And so in the middle of this everyday activity, and as for those of you who come to these temples often and maybe have your own practice of meditation, part of this tradition is bringing that Zazen mind, right? The cultivation of concentration, mindfulness, stability of body, stability of mind to our everyday activities. And so perhaps because he was so focused, right, this undivided activity of sweeping, when the tile struck the bamboo, he had this awakening, right? realizing that his thinking mind, all the words and phrases in all of his books and all of his thoughts were not going to give him the answer to that koan. But because we're so identified with thinking mind, and for those of you who have been meditating for a while, or maybe those of you who have just started, maybe this is part of the inquiry that's come up for you, right? Is, well, who is the one that is thinking? What are thoughts? When I first started practicing Zen all those years ago, I never thought I'd be here. I just wanted relief from suffering. And no one ever said anything to me that I wasn't my thoughts, I wasn't my emotions. I was raised very Catholic. Well, my father was very Catholic. I was just raised Catholic, but I never really resonated with that religion. So this is a process, again, of studying ourselves, right? Studying ourselves to see, what is this one? What is this one? But because we get so identified with our thinking mind, and when we're meditating, we can see some of that, right? If our body and mind slows down, still, we can start to notice some of these thoughts that might be arising. Notice what is going on in the body, too. And for me, with this situation with the rattlesnake, I think the part of the inquiry that came up for me was, well, it didn't seem like there was a lot of thoughts when I heard the rattle and the hiss and the coil. I just moved out of the way, right? There was this instinctual response or reaction. And so the question was, well, who's perceiving, right? Who's perceiving when it doesn't feel like there's a Heather there perceiving what's going on, or there's not these volitional mental formations, right? So these volitional mental formations did not seem to arise from the time that sound was heard, those sounds were heard, and I jumped out of the way. Right, so when one of our 5 sense organs makes contact with a corresponding sense object, in its sense field, we have what we call contact, right? Sensory contact. So in this case, the sound of the rattlesnake, right? This raspy hiss, I heard it, and because there's hearing consciousness, that's the sense field, there was a reaction. Right? So these volitional formations, or samskara is one way, maybe some of you have heard of that. It's the 4th aggregate out of this paradigm of 5 aggregates that the Buddha put forth as one of his one of his main teachings of how to understand, how to study this body-mind. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those. So these mental formations include psycho-emotional, so this is the 4th aggregate, but I didn't talk about them in order, so just heads up for you linear people. So mental formations include psycho-emotional processes, if you will. I mean, we would call them nowadays emotions like joy, anger, confusion, concentration, equanimity, and in this case, fear. And these are all dynamic, right? They're processes, okay? They're impermanent, and they're also impersonal, okay? And if you know the 3 marks of existence, there is suffering, right? This dukkha, this dissatisfaction, when we cling on what's arising and make it into a me, we take things personally. That's one way that we can suffer. And then they're also impermanent. So the rattlesnake, fortunately the rattlesnake didn't follow me around everywhere hissing and coiling. So this was a momentary sensory experience, right? So it's impermanent. And then also there's this other characteristic of conditioned phenomena, which is everything in this room, except for space, but that's another talk. And that is that there's this not self characteristic, right? So whatever's arising in our sense doors is not who we are. It's just passing phenomena, okay? So the trunk of a banana tree is the simile that the Buddha uses to talk about mental formations, talk about formations. And there's 3 types of formations. There's bodily formations, right? So body, we chant that body, speech, and mind, right? So there's a bodily volitional formations, verbal, speaking, and then also thoughts or these psycho-emotional processes, that are also part of this aggregate of formations. So what we perceive with our eyes, right, our sense organs of our eyes, we see this banana tree, and we think, oh, that looks pretty solid. And I remember once when I was living in Louisiana, because I never saw a banana tree in New York, and we were taking care of this property, and my partner at the time was taught how to prune it or trim it. I didn't realize that it was just all these curled, large banana leaves, and that's how it grows. The whole trunk are just banana leaves, and that's how it unfurls. So if you were to cut the banana tree and start looking for the center, right, you wouldn't see. There would be there's no solid banana tree at the center like we perceive it to be, right? So it's a misperception to think that the tree is solid. Just like it's a misperception to think that we're all solid, right? And that all this form is solid. And now that we are in some ways very advanced, in other ways we're obviously not very advanced, but we have all this scientific knowledge to prove this, that everything is in motion all the time. We just don't perceive it in motion, right? So if we were to unpack the banana tree, there's no own being is another word you might have heard. There's no own being, there's no solid, independent, permanent existence of a banana tree. So this, what we perceive as solid, this form, right? This is the first aggregate. And the Buddha uses the simile, a lump of foam, right, to describe form. And when you're living at Tassajara, or anywhere in the natural environment here, you have those ponds down there, where you see a puddle and there's a little bubble on top. So we get to, I know you're going to say, Heather, this is obvious, but really, there's something about intellectually understanding impermanence, intellectually understanding, oh yeah, I'm a lump of foam, or there's no center. And then when you're feeling more elemental, or some people would say feral at Tassajara, if you're there too long, you can feel the insubstantiality of this body-mind, right? You can look at that bubble on the creek and be like, oh wow, yeah, a lump of foam. These aggregates are not solid. So this lump of foam, this form is the first aggregate. And in this particular instance, the lump of foam that I call Heather met the lump of foam that we would call a rattlesnake. Of course, a rattlesnake doesn't have a name for me. At least I don't think it does. And then also, I'm sure the rattlesnake probably experienced me as threatening as well, which is why it coiled. Right? That's a defensive posture of a rattlesnake. And even though they don't have any ears, they take in sensory vibrations through their body and their tongue, is what I read about. So the sensory contact with the raspy sound of the rattlesnake's hiss and the rattling leads me to the second aggregate, right? These feeling tones. Now, maybe in Zen we don't talk about the feeling tones in the same way that like a Theravadan teacher would, or a meditator, or Vipassana, but these feeling tones are not emotions, they're just physical sensations. And they're either pleasant, right? I love ice cream, potato chips, right? So it's easier to stay away from ice cream at Tassajara. Not so much potato chips, because they don't melt like ice cream does. So there's this pleasurable aspect, right, to our human existence. So there's a feeling tone that arises of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. We don't even notice. So in this instance, quite unpleasant, right? Hearing the rattle, the hiss, the coil was very unpleasant, and I took it as life-threatening. So this process, so the other aggregate that comes up here is this conceiving or naming or noticing, right? This is the third aggregate, right? The process of conceiving. So this is when a sense object, in this case the rattlesnake's sound, is brought into our consciousness, right? Now, had I not heard the rattlesnake, I would have just walked along and that was it. There would have been no contact with the rattlesnake sound. And what I find really curious and mysterious in a way, I mean, I know it's not super mysterious because we've tried to investigate everything and have scientific proof about everything, but it was a little mysterious at the time. I mean, I was so shocked and frightened. I put shocked hyphen frightened when I heard the hiss, that there wasn't any labeling of rattlesnake in the grass. There was just, right, just an immediate reaction, an appropriate response, which is threatening animal, I can die. Boom. Again, that didn't even show up. But I remember, though, when I was jumping out of the way, I had this image, because I've seen lots of movies, or even if I haven't seen them, but these image of like a rattlesnake pouncing, right, and just sticking, its fangs into my calf or my ankle. So the Buddha used a simile of a shimmering mirage to describe our perceptions of form, sounds, odors, tastes, tactile, and mental phenomena, right? So for the mind consciousness, the object of minds are these thoughts. But also the objects that come in through all of our sense doors are processed through mind consciousness, okay? So when a sound arises, the mind is right there making associations, right? These mental formations shows up, images, emotions show up, and then I have an experience. Well, I have a very filtered experience of what's going on based on karmic conditioning, right? So consciousness is the fifth aggregate, and it's the basis of all the other four aggregates, right? And the Buddha used the simile of a magical illusion in referring to these 6 types of consciousness. So like I said, we have the ear consciousness, eye consciousness, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness. So every sense organ has a consciousness associated with it. That's how we're able to hear, right? This sense field. And I want to just mention that, consciousness is not an entity. It's a process. It's always in flux, right? It's never static. It's a function. It's a function. It's not an entity, right? There's nothing static about consciousness. It's always changing. And of course, it's impermanent consciousness, and it also is impersonal, right? Now, because as human animals, one of our most prominent senses is our eyes, right? So we are usually visual animals, and I know I want to remind everybody that we are animals. I know I don't always, I'm definitely much more in touch with being an animal when I'm freezing or too hot at Tassajara. A complaining animal if it's too hot. But just say that I had seen this rattlesnake first, right? And then I would have been like, oh, there's that rattlesnake. But wait a second, I thought I read in Wikipedia that this type of rattlesnake is not nearly as aggressive as the rattlesnakes in Texas where I used to live. So it's probably just coiling to defend itself, and it's not going to strike, so I should be okay. But maybe I should jump out of the way anyway, right? That may not happen when we come face to face with an animal that can kill us. But we do that a lot when we see people we don't like, right? Right? There's all this cogitation, all of these stories can be created, right? There's stories. So had I seen that rattlesnake, maybe, I don't think I would have actually jumped as far as I could, because I'm not really much of a jumper, right? So if I had said, okay, I need to jump as far as possible, maybe I wouldn't have jumped out of the way and it would have been able to strike me. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten that far because I'm not conditioned to jump far, right? But because if you say, in a way, there's this thicket of mental formations, I'm trying to figure something out, and that is causing me to hesitate, right? So in this case, I feel really grateful that I didn't see the snake. I probably would have even been more scared, and maybe I would have turned around and gone back up the Tony Trail and just waited until I thought it was gone. I don't know. You can get kind of panicky when we overly think, right? So, so these 5 aggregates are what we usually call ourselves me, right? Our psycho-emotional and physical, our psycho-emotional personality and the physicality of our bodies, right? This lump of foam that sometimes I perceive as solid. Although I think the older I get, the less solid it feels. The more in control it feels, or the less in control I feel of this body and the less solid it feels. So it's these 5 aggregates, this me, this lump of foam, and all these aggregates. Another way to phrase it is also that this is the only way for us to experience life, is through this pile of aggregates, right? This is the conduit by which we experience our life. Okay? And for most of us, these aggregates work the same. What's different, depending on if we can hear, if we can see, if we can taste, we can smell, we can touch, right? If we have those consciousnesses, is our karma, right? Our karma is different. And our thoughts, which while we're sitting zazen, we're letting go of the thoughts, we're practicing being bodies, becoming really intimate with what's going on here, which does include our thoughts. I feel like thoughts, some of them we don't really need to investigate. However, others can really reveal our karma because they are karma. They are karmic formations. So we can learn about ourselves, for sure, like what stories arise when we're in certain situations, especially if it's a recurring situation or it's a recurring narrative. It can be helpful to kind of unpack that, to inquire about that with a teacher, with a therapist, with a good friend. And you can explore some of those stories. It's just that when we reify those stories and say, this is who I am a person who can't jump. And associations, you remember, Heather, how you stunk on the basketball team in high school? Which is true, because I can't jump, and I really can't dribble, right? So, of course, I didn't think about that. Maybe if I had seen the rattlesnake, I would say, oh, Heather, remember, you can't really jump. Remember, you were on the basketball team in high school, and you can't really jump, so you're not really going to jump really far, so, okay, right? So we have associations based on our karma, or our karma is associations, right? These filters that arise. So these 5 aggregates, as some of you might know, sometimes they're referred to in the sutras as the 5 aggregates of clinging. Right? But I want to let everyone know that they don't inherently cling. Right? They don't inherently cling, which means they're like this. They're like an open hand, if you will. Right? There's 5 aggregates, five fingers. So when we're not making the sound, sights, sensations, formations, when we're not making these sense objects, including thoughts and emotions, into a me, our hand can stay open and we don't react so much, right? So I like to use this example of a fist. So when we cling, right, to those aggregates, when we say, oh, here's all these aggregates, Heather can't jump, she's going to die, she sucked on the basketball team, right? All these ways in which I have ideas about my body and mind, this me. When that's really tight, then I experience myself as separate, right, from what's going on in the environment, right? Then maybe I do feel really surrounded by the environment instead of part of the environment, right? I don't feel like the elements out there are the elements in here, right? So this fist, I call it like this fist of self. And then this is where this is suffering, right? And I have this acronym that helps me sometimes, which is this fist of self. Suffering, ego, limits our freedom, right? Or separate ego limits our freedom. The sense of a separate, independent, abiding Heather, this permanent Heather. And of course, if we have our fist closed, there's a lot of energy that takes to keeping your fist closed, right? There's a lot of energy that we can use inefficiently to keep those stories going, right? Stories about ourselves, story about life, story about the people you love, story about the people you can't stand. Those are the juiciest ones, right? So we have to watch, when are those aggregates clinging? When is there this aspect of consciousness that makes us feel separate, right? Makes us feel separate from the people, makes us feel separate from the environment, which is really the only way, when we feel separate, that we can actually bring ourselves to harm other people, and also destroy the earth, which we're very good at. So when we're able to experience ourselves more like a fluid, if you will, less permanent, more fluid, can kind of sort of help with the not becoming, right? Not reifying that old Heather who was on the basketball team and couldn't jump, which isn't really a big story of mine actually at all. But because I was jumping away from rattlesnake, I thought I would bring it up. Oh yeah, that's right, I was not much of a jumper. So yeah, so there's a way that we reify, we make concrete these stories of ourselves, right? When we have these aggregates, when they're clinging, those stories maybe are clinging, especially the ones that have been with us for a very long time that cause us the most suffering. And also another way to look at this is also like a reference point, right? The more that this is a reference point of Heather, instead of this flow of sensory experience, sensory perceptions, right? The more solid I feel, and the more I take things personally, right? Which we all do when we're like in traffic. Right? Unless we're the ones in the rush cutting people off, that's okay. But when someone does that to us, we can get very annoyed by it, right? And so to use to use this phrase that I like that Dogen talks about, the less that we feel ourselves as separate. And he says, life must be the rattlesnake and life must be Heather. I mean, the rattlesnake's living its life, Heather's living its life. We have this encounter in this moment. The rattlesnake is part of me, I'm part of it. We're both perceiving each other and everything else that's going on in this particular moment. And if I had a previous experience with rattlesnakes, maybe it would have even been worse. Maybe I wouldn't even go hiking because I'd be like, oh my God, there's going to be a rattlesnake, right? So there's this book that I highly recommend. It's called The Heart Attack Sutra by Karl Brunholz. And I guess the legend is that when the Heart Sutra was first given as a teaching, many people, if not all of them, had heart attacks because it was so radical. And we chant the Heart Sutra, as you know, every day at the 3 temples of San Francisco Zen Center. So he, again, it's a really brilliant book, and he talks about the processes of the 5 aggregates in this way. Not only is our perceiving mind, and I'm pointing here, but we know the mind's not really here. So not only is our perceiving mind dynamic, is right, changing moment to moment, but so are the objects that it's perceiving, right? So it's not like, this is solid, it's not moving. No, this is changing as well. I'm not able to perceive it as changing, right? Phenomena, everything is phenomena, cannot be defined by themselves, right? The rattlesnake doesn't exist outside of Heather. This doesn't exist outside of Heather. This collection of people is this particular collection of people, right? We're not existing outside of each other. We are interdependent. We're perceiving each other. Rather, we can only talk about them as, it's kind of a long phrase here, complexes of mutual relationships, right? So this complex of mutual relationships, complex of mutual relationships, complex of mutual relationships with other phenomena, right? Other phenomena is also complexes of mutual relationships with other complexes of mutual relationships. And perhaps he phrased it all this way to help us not try to grasp onto it, like the complexes of mutual relationships. Everything is always relating, right? It's not a relationship. You could say maybe a relationshiping. It's not consciousness. Maybe it's a consciousness-ing, right? We can change our language a little bit, not when we're around English teachers, of course, but to reflect the fluidity, the flux of this karmic being right here, and all of you as well. So had I taken this situation with the rattlesnake personally, mental formations could be something like this. I can't believe that sneaky rattlesnake hid itself in the grass waiting for me to return from my triumphant hike up the Tony Trail and scare me to death. It's such an evil creature, right? Serpents we know are evil. Such an evil creature, and it deserves to die for making me feel so vulnerable and so frightened. I'm going to come back with a few bodhisattvas and teach it a lesson, right? Now, it's funny because we know rattlesnakes, they're not like, I'm just going to sit here and wait for Heather or any other unsuspecting hiker, right? They're not operating that way. So this is kind of ludicrous, but we do this a lot on everything, everybody, all the time, right? All this, what the Buddha would call papancha, right? This mental proliferation, mental elaboration, where the rattlesnake's just being a rattlesnake, Heather's just being Heather, whatever that is, whoever I am, and that's it, right? Without taking this sense object of a rattlesnake personally. It's so much easier, although I'm sure there's people out there who would take the rattlesnake's actions personally. It's so much harder to do that when we're interacting with other human animals. Right? And we impute on them a solidity, a reification. I like to call it like we make people into statues. But if I'm making someone into a statue, then I make myself into a statue. Right? And then it's just like, I know who that person is. They're going to be this way. And I think we can see that writ large, right, in our society, how polarized it's become. Right? So this was my first encounter at Tassajara with a rattlesnake that was coiled and threatening me, threatening me, damn it. But I have seen rattlesnakes like on the path when they're just chilling out, getting some sun, but I've never seen one coiled and hissing and rattling at this lump of foam. So since that was my first experience, it does leave this sense impression, right, which is also one way to look at these samskara, these formations, like a proclivity in our body-mind that can get reinforced. So say every single time I went out, I saw a rattlesnake and it scared the bejesus out of me, every single time. Well, then I would have this story in my body as well, right? This trauma of always being scared by a rattlesnake. I'm always going to meet a rattlesnake. And I'm sure that we know that stories for ourselves, right? We keep reinforcing, making real these stories. That sense impression would be reinforced. So it's another transformative aspect of meditation, especially when you live in Sangha, and maybe somebody who a few days ago you didn't get along with, now all of a sudden you're sick, and they're showering you with kindness, and you're like, why don't you just be mean to me because I don't like you? And now you're being kind to me. So you're shaking up my story of you, but that's great. And when we're in community all the time, we cycle through all these roles, some of which we're not so great at, we get to just be with the people and ourselves in different roles. And we get to see this fluidity of the person. And it takes a lot of effort to keep our fists closed, right? Keep our hearts closed when we're in continuous Sangha and we see people. Over and over again, we see all aspects of them. We don't make them into the statue. So fortunately for the rattlesnake, it can't ruminate, right? Probably after our chance encounter, I'm sure it didn't write a Dharma talk, but probably felt, like I said, threatened, and probably just slithered off into the grass, found the rodent, ate it, and then just hung out in the sun, right? Took a nap. That was its verse of understanding. Just going back to being a rattlesnake. Well, it was never not a rattlesnake. So here's my verse of understanding. One hiss, and I lost what I know. No more deceiving myself. The ancient path unearthed, shining forth beneath my feet. Jumping like a stone woman, landing on the wild reeds, swaying in the wind of no mind. Thank you very much. And now it's Q&A, right, Ino-san? Okay. Ooh, you gotta love the frogs, right?
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. You kind of talked about what my present challenge is, but I think the word was only brought up once directly. And in many spheres of my life, I've sort of been experiencing reductionism, both sort of social, psychological, physical, and spiritually. And in certain regards, it's had a real, it's transformative, I think is a good word to use. But one of the things that I'm really struggling with, and I don't think I've had the wisdom to cultivate a good understanding about it, is joy. As I've continued to maybe give up certain parts of my older life, the joy, which often maybe in the past was associated with pleasure, has disappeared. And so I'm just kind of wondering, I'm working on other elements of my life, psychologically, socially, physically, I can't do much, but what spiritually or through Zen tradition, because I know in Zen we don't talk, it's there, but it's not at the forefront like maybe other Buddhist traditions. So I'm wondering if there's anything you might be able to add to experiencing joy.
Yeah, that's a great question because, I have difficulty sometimes with the Zen kind of sternness. Yeah. And I don't necessarily understand. I think sometimes it's just like people are focusing on what they're doing and not making eye contact, and somehow that seems to be part of this tradition, at least here at Zen Center. So joy, yeah, I mean, I try to be happy. Yeah, I think I am happy. I felt happy giving the talk. Felt joyful for me to offer the story and the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. So I don't know what it is I don't know if you're intentionally reducing the activities that were giving you joy. I would just say if you can do those activities, do them, be joyful. And if you're not able, maybe there's some other activities that can come into your life that help with feeling joyful. I mean, joyful is just like any other state. Joy is like any other state, which means it's impermanent and it comes and goes, right? So I think like a contentment or equanimity a contentment with what's arising, because you have to watch that mind that's like, well, I remember when I used to experience joy, when I used to be that person back in the day, and now I'm not that person, so I'm miserable because of so watch, right, that papancha, that mental elaboration, those stories that just lead you away from here. And I think that wandering mind is often a suffering mind, right? So like just even for me, coming out of Tassajara, and when there's that, I think Pema Chodron said it, or maybe it was Ram Dass, I think, said, you think you're enlightened, spend a couple of weeks or a day or so with your family. So I come out of Tassajara, a couple of weeks later, I'm on the road down to LA to spend time with my mother and my sister, right? Now, if I carry forward some aspects of who Heather is sitting here, I mean, no one, I don't think they've ever seen me in my robes, unless they're watching now, which I'm sure they're not. But like I have to leave that Heather is already past, right? It's like she is past and she's not past, right? So it's like there's a way that there's part of us that's carried forward. We don't hold that tightly either. I'm just trying to responding, I hope, appropriately to the situation with my mother and my sister, who I get along with both of them very well. But when I'm doing all the things for my mom, because she's 87, and I'm like, I really don't want to clip your toenails, but I do. And if I'm clipping the toenails, and I think I want to be somewhere else, A, I could harm her. B, there's just suffering, because I think there's many more activities that are more fulfilling or interesting than clipping my mother's toenails. But if I let my mind go there, then that's like a misery, right? So you're in this new place where some things are falling away, and I think that's partly what happens when we get older. Some things fall away, and can we watch them fall away and just see how that feels for us without saying, well, I'm not joyful anymore, so darn it. Just see what's there. See what's really there. Watch when those stories solidify, and watch when the mind is referencing a former person, right? A former selfing. And when we bring that selfing forward, which we're not really anyway, but if we think we are, then it can kind of create misery, because we want to be who we were before, right? We know that, the glory days, right? So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I say smile.
It is helpful, and additionally, I'm a part-time caregiver for my mom, and I forgot to clip her toenails, so when I get back, I'll do that too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciated the talk, especially about integration and nature. It really resonates with me as I live in the technical world and work in it and then experience it gratefully in Marin County as much as I can. And I really enjoyed the talk about form and non-form and selfing. It really worked for me, but I have a question that's a request. Could you please reread your poem of understanding again?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
And then my younger self would have it memorized, but this is an older self that doesn't memorize. Well, I haven't. Anyway, so yes, thank you. One hiss, and I lost what I know, no more deceiving myself, the ancient path unearthed, shining forth beneath my feet. Jumping like a stone woman, right beyond the portment of sound and sight, jumping like a stone woman, landing on the wild reeds, swaying in the wind of no mind. Yeah. Thank you.
One of the more complicated points that I've been interested in is kind of the Bardo total, or kind of the thought of that. And I'm also from a Catholic background and some family that's approaching end of life that I think it'd be, something interesting or beneficial to them. How do you, number one, understand it? Because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And number two, kind of help that for people that are approaching end of life.
Oof. Well, let me say that a friend of mine, a Dharma friend who is a death doula and a Buddhist chaplain, she told me of this resource. Her name is Barbara Carnes, or Carnes, Karnes, and she works with people, families, as well as the people who are dying, about the dying process. And I just ordered these very small, I don't know what they're called. See, name recognition. Anyway, these little pamphlets, thank you, pamphlets about the dying process, pain, and what goes on for people as they're, in a way, we're all actively dying, right, as soon as we're born. But clearly, some of us get closer and closer to dying as we get older. So I want to mention that before I forget. So I'm not so familiar with the Bardo. I think it's more of a Tibetan concept. I do remember when I studied for a little bit with Pema Chodron at Gampo Abbey in Nova Scotia, one of the older, hilarious nuns there who became a nun when she was 60. I think she was in her 80s when I met her. She said that the Bardo could also be seen as this in-between space, if you will, like a liminal consciousness. And maybe we can understand it in the 12-fold chain of causation, dependent co-origination, which I'm only an expert in studying here. Not necessarily an expert, but this is where I mostly study 12-fold chain, is here. But when we have this sense of becoming, who am I? What's going on when this contact happens? The way she's talked about the Bardo was because one moment of consciousness affects the next moment of consciousness. How we are of body and mind in this moment of consciousness affects the next one. So that liminal space, perhaps of non-reification, when I don't really know that it's a rattlesnake, or I don't really know, sometimes, I don't really know that the person coming around the corner is someone I dislike, and I say, hey, how you doing? I'm like, I thought it was someone else, right? So that space there, that liminality where everything is possible, if you will, if we can be like, I think Jesus said, right, newborn babes, right? If we can have that kind of ability to be new with what's arising moment after moment, she would say that was her understanding. It could be the understanding of the Bardo, a psycho-emotional state or a liminal consciousness, which if we can be in that way, I don't really know what it's going to be like to be with my mother and my sister. Of course, there's a part of me that really does know what it's going to be like, but let's be surprised. So in that way, looking at it from that aspect, it's the more stable, really stable, not like shoving my feelings down, the more equanimous and attentive and kind and generous I can be in this moment, that will condition the next moment, right? Those are formations, body, speech, and mind, that condition the next moment. I think mostly with everybody really is how present can we be with our elderly parents or our young children or a partner without thinking I need to be doing something way more exciting than clipping the toenails, right? And I think that practice opportunity of, because I am not a very patient person, it's really difficult sometimes for me to be patient. So to be able to practice being patient, like this is what my mother needs, it's not about me. And it is about me, because the way I take care of her, the ways I'm taking care of myself, right? So often I'm impatient with the parts of myself that I see reflected in other people that I'm impatient with here and also there. So yeah, so that bardo is, what is the flexibility, if you will, of consciousness, space, time, to go broad, to go big, and then just in front of us is, can I remind myself I don't really know what's going to happen in the next moment, right? And if we can prepare ourselves for our parents' or anybody's death, including our own, then we can be more fully present. And I think that's what people resonate with, is when we're fully present with them, right? Fully present without judgment, or at least not believing the judgment, right, when we're there. So, and maybe that's how I would say I'd experience or understand Christ consciousness, right, was Jesus' ability to be present with people in that way, that bringing that non-duality, right, just that loving kindness that he emanated, the acceptance of people, being present with people. To me, that's the Christ consciousness. Maybe, forgive me, I'm not a theologian, but what comes up is this Buddha nature, right? The Buddha nature. This reminding ourselves that we're connected to everything, everybody, even these inanimate objects, right? The walls and tiles and pebbles all expound the Buddha Dharma. So clipping my mother's toenails, if I'm really present for it, there's just clipping toenails without all the extra, without all the associations of my mother, I don't know if that's helpful or not. Yeah. Hopefully there's no nail clipping in the bardo. I don't know. Or maybe we're clipping each other's toenails, like, to help out. Maybe that's better. Visual.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. I have a question that's not fully formed and also a comment, a curiosity. I love the part where you describe consciousness as consciousnessing, because I hadn't thought of consciousness evolving just as a question of who am I as a soul also evolving. So thinking of that shifts my framework of consciousness, and I'm wondering how to judge it or not judge it, because again, like tipping the toenails is either a pleasant or unpleasant experience, but it's just my label of it. So similarly, the consciousness also evolving, do I play a role in making it evolving in a good way or a bad way, or is that not really? Because again, that ties back into karma and dharma as well, because my good actions in some ways ideally should evolve the consciousness in a good way, but it's a label as well.
Yeah.
So that's the first question. Secondly, I don't know what to make of it, but I, funny enough, woke up this morning with a dream about lots of snakes, which I have not had in a long time, but I happen to be in a puddle
Of snakes.
Of snakes,
Oh, wow.
which I don't know why. So somehow it left off with your exact experience. So that was more curiosity. Connection with the dreams is always a fascinating experience for me, and subliminal messages. So if you had any experiences during your time meditating for long periods, and if you have any connections you've been able to make.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's an easy one. Consciousness. Okay. Yeah. So what I would say is, what I would. When we are meditating and dropping out of our thoughts, right? There's lots of thoughts that arise, images that arise, and part of the practice of meditating is coming back to the body, which is not a time traveler. It's always right here. And we're trying to, as we know, yoke our wandering mind to the body and experience the breathing sensations and really trying to settle and quiet the mind, not like this, but just like a flow. And the more settled the mind is, and and Thich Nhat Hanh has this wonderful analogy, which probably actually goes back to the Buddha. When our, if you will, our small mind, our thinking mind is all stirred up. It's like all the sand and water, right? And then when we are meditating, those granule sand, those sand particles start to sink to the bottom, and then there's more clarity, right? So you could say in a way that's also perhaps an attenuation of karma, that this is how my life was before I started practicing. Just lots of ideas, lots of concepts that I didn't know were me. And then through practice of meditation, those started to settle. I could see when we could also use something fun like a snowball, right? It doesn't have to be boring sand in a bottle and water. Like those cool snowballs, the snow's everywhere, and then it settles, and you can see the scene. Maybe when ours settle, the snow globe is empty. We don't see anything, right? But I would say that in and of itself is transforming consciousness, right? We don't have to say, okay, I'm sitting down, I'm going to transform consciousness. I would say that the process of being with what's arising, with compassionate awareness, not moving away from it or noticing when we're moving away from it in body and mind, coming back to the physicality of right now, right now, right now. And maybe if we were really good, we could experience the bardo between the snaps, right, of the finger, and I don't seem to snap very well. But just over and over again, not being pushed around by what arises in the mind, right? So because we're not acting on these thoughts, which are karma, we're not producing other karma in response or reaction to that karma. So slowly, just by sitting there, it just attenuates itself. And I remember Pema Chodron saying to me, she said that energy without labels is wisdom, right? So we label, like you said, I'm going to label this activity as transforming consciousness, or I'm going to label rattlesnake and make it outside, or I'm going to be like, oh, I really don't want to cut my mother's toenails. So our conceptual mind is always going, but when we have moments, and if you perhaps been meditating for a while, or you have a moment of grace, or you do lots of sesshin, when the body-mind gets really settled, the perceptual process really slows down, right? So we can sometimes even feel a thought before it shows up, right? And then we don't buy into thoughts so much, because who are we when we're not thinking? Who are we when there aren't any thoughts? Who was I when I jumped out of the way of the rattlesnake, right? And so Pema Chodron, when she said that to me, it was so profound. It was like, oh, energy. And she said, all accomplishing wisdom, right, Tibetan, all accomplishing wisdom is always there, but our stories get in front of it, our karma obscures it, even though it's not touched by that, right? I mean, Dogen says, trap and snares can't touch it, nothing can defile it. But that's what happens, those obscurations, that papancha, that mental proliferation, covers over the reality of us just arising together. I mean, I'm simplifying things. That's for me, mainly. But so that process of not identifying, just identifying with mental and physical phenomena helps us to, I think, be freer, right? And if we use the sense of the storehouse consciousness, this alaya vijnana, right? That eighth consciousness in Yogacara, that slowly purifies itself when we are not so karmically involved with what's going on, right? Those people who are always trying to control everything, right? So can we just let things unfold, right? And sometimes that resolves itself, right? So, there's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, which I haven't read, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. It's called Transformation at the Base, right? And it's about how the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, which has all these seeds, and all those seeds are different for each one of us, right? Those are our karmic seeds, how they can be transformed through the practice of meditation, through, loving kindness meditation, walking meditation, studying the Buddha's teachings, through service. So I think that this is what happens when we're meditating, right? Thoughts arise, they're passing through, we're not making a big deal out of them. We can really see that, especially if you sit all day. You feel how everything's impermanent, right? So, who's responsible for the serpent, the serpents in the puddle, in the pond dream? You're not really responsible for it. You didn't fall asleep saying. I know there's some Tibetan yoga, dream yoga and all that. I understand. I'm not familiar with it, but that's just what's arising in your consciousness. Now, and some people would say serpents are wise and they really, they're amazing creatures and they symbolize wisdom or something. Obviously, from Catholic background, they're what caused the downfall of Adam and Eve, because he presented the apple to Eve, and boy, do we wish he presented it to Adam, because life would have been different for all of us women, but that didn't happen. And once again, he's not taking responsibility for his own actions, right? So I think that does attenuate our karma, right? This and that arises. Karma can be changed, right? Karma is impermanent, right? So I think that's what's so transformative about meditation and the Buddha's teachings, is nothing is fixed, including karma. Otherwise, it wouldn't transform, right? So karma can transform with our being present, with this compassionate awareness, what's arising, dropping all of our ideas about ourselves, about life, and just being able to develop this broader, deeper container on the cushion so that we're not reacting all over the place when something happens and taking everything personally. Yeah. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's one back there.
You were talking about interconnectedness and elemental and being one with nature, and you wanted a word for that.
Yes.
And I came up with two.
Okay.
So I don't have a question, I have an offer.
Great. I love it.
Okay. One is environment.
Environment. Okay, I like it. I like it.
And one is human nature.
Human nature. Wow. Okay. I like it.
That's my offer.
Environment. I like it. Yeah. It already feels better than feeling like I'm surrounded. Well, thank you, everyone, for your patience and your questions and your practice.